Commander Sarah Mitchell stepped off the military transport truck, her boots hitting the dusty ground of Camp Pendleton with practiced precision. The California sun blazed overhead as she adjusted her dress uniform, ensuring every ribbon and medal sat perfectly aligned on her chest. At 32, she carried herself with the quiet confidence that came from years of specialized training and combat experience that few would ever know about. The recruitment training facility buzzed with activity as dozens of fresh-faced recruits moved between buildings, their nervous energy palpable in the thick afternoon air. Sarah had been assigned as a guest instructor for the elite selection program, though the recruits didn't know her true background yet. Her orders were simple: observe, evaluate, and provide tactical expertise to the training cadre. As she walked toward the main administrative building, a group of male recruits noticed her approach. They were lounging near an equipment shed, taking a brief water break between training exercises. Their conversations died down as they watched her walk past, their eyes immediately drawn to her pristine uniform and the array of ribbons decorating her chest. "Hey, look at this," whispered Recruit Martinez, a stocky 19-year-old from Texas who had been the loudest voice in their group since arrival. "Somebody's playing dress-up today." His buddies chuckled quietly, thinking they were being discreet. Recruit Thompson, a tall kid from Ohio, squinted at her uniform details. "Those ribbons look awfully shiny and new. Bet half of them came straight from the PX store." "Probably some desk jockey trying to impress the instructors," added Recruit Williams, who had been struggling with the physical demands of training and was looking for any target to redirect attention from his own shortcomings. "Look at her walking around like she owns the place." Sarah heard every word, but her expression never changed. Years of operating in hostile environments had taught her to maintain composure regardless of external circumstances. She continued her steady pace toward the building, her bearing straight and professional. The recruits grew bolder, mistaking her silence for weakness or inability to hear them. Martinez stood up straighter, puffing out his chest. "Hey there, sweetheart," he called out, loud enough that other groups of recruits turned to watch the developing situation. "Think you might be lost? The costume party is probably somewhere else on base." Several other recruits gathered around, drawn by the commotion. Some looked uncomfortable with Martinez's behavior, but peer pressure and the pack mentality of military training kept them from speaking up. The group had grown from 4 to nearly 15 young men, all watching to see how this situation would unfold. "Those are some pretty ribbons you got there," Thompson joined in, emboldened by the growing audience. "Did you earn those in the typing pool, or maybe for perfect attendance at the officers' club?" Sarah finally stopped walking and turned to face the group. Her gray eyes were calm and steady as she took in each face, memorizing details with the automatic precision of someone trained in reconnaissance. She didn't speak immediately, instead letting the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable for everyone watching. "You boys seem to have a lot of energy," she said finally, her voice carrying clearly across the training area. It was neither loud nor aggressive, but there was something in her tone that made several of the recruits instinctively straighten their posture. "That's good. Energy is important in military service." Williams, trying to show off for his peers, stepped forward with a cocky grin. "We got plenty of energy, lady. Probably more than you could handle. Why don't you run along to wherever they keep the—" He paused, searching for what he thought was a clever insult. "The uniform models." The comment drew nervous laughter from some of the recruits, but others were beginning to sense that something wasn't quite right about this situation. There was something in the woman's bearing, in the way she held herself, that suggested she wasn't just any ordinary officer who had wandered into their training area. Sarah's lips curved into a slight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Uniform models," she repeated thoughtfully. "That's creative. I haven't heard that one before." She took a step closer to the group, and several recruits unconsciously took small steps backward. "You know what I find interesting?" she continued, her voice conversational but with an edge that was becoming more apparent. Young men who are so quick to judge what they don't understand. It usually indicates either inexperience or insecurity, sometimes both. Martinez felt his face reddening, partly from embarrassment and partly from anger at being called out. We understand plenty, sweetheart. We understand that some people like to play soldier while others do the real work. The word sweetheart hung in the air like a challenge. Sarah's expression didn't change, but those paying close attention might have noticed her hands, which had been clasped loosely behind her back, shift slightly into a more ready position. Sweetheart, she repeated slowly, as if tasting the word. You know, in my experience, men who use terms like that are usually trying to compensate for feeling threatened by women in positions they can't imagine a woman earning through merit. The crowd of recruits had grown larger, and word was beginning to spread through the training area that some kind of confrontation was developing. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, one of the drill instructors, noticed the gathering and started walking over to investigate. Thompson, feeling the need to defend his friend Martinez, stepped up beside him. Look, we don't know who you think you are, but this is a serious training facility. We're here to become real warriors, not to play games with people who bought their ranks at the uniform store. Real warriors, Sarah mused, nodding slowly. Tell me, what makes a real warrior? Is it the ability to intimidate someone you perceive as weaker? The courage to mock someone when you're surrounded by your friends? Or maybe it's the wisdom to judge a person's capabilities based on their gender and your own limited understanding? Her questions were delivered without heat, almost academically, but they cut deeper than any shouted response would have. Several recruits were beginning to look distinctly uncomfortable, realizing that they might be on the wrong side of this confrontation. Williams, who had been the source of the uniform model comment, tried to regain control of the narrative. We're just saying that some of us have been training hard to earn our place here, while others seem to think they can walk around with ribbons they never earned. Ribbons I never earned, Sarah repeated, her voice still calm but with a note of steel creeping in. That's a serious accusation in the military. You're essentially calling me a fraud and suggesting I'm wearing decorations I have no right to display. The gravity of what Williams had implied began to sink in among the more thoughtful recruits. In military culture, falsely wearing decorations was not just an insult. It was a serious offense that could result in criminal charges. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez had reached the edge of the crowd and was pushing through to see what was happening. He caught sight of Sarah's uniform and ribbons, and his eyes widened slightly in recognition, but the recruits were too focused on their confrontation to notice his reaction. "Ma'am!" Rodriguez called out, but his voice was drowned out by Martinez, who was feeling cornered and responding by becoming more aggressive. "Look, sweetheart, we don't know what game you're playing, but we can see through it. You want to impress someone with your shiny ribbons and perfect hair? Go find some other suckers who don't know any better." The use of sweetheart again was deliberate, and Sarah's patience with the disrespect was wearing thin. She had dealt with sexism and discrimination throughout her career, but these young men were testing boundaries that few people had ever dared to cross with her. "I see," she said quietly. "So your assessment is that I'm here to play games and impress people with unearned decorations? That my presence in this training facility is somehow fraudulent or inappropriate?" Her calm response was somehow more unsettling than anger would have been. The recruits were beginning to sense that they had made a serious mistake, but pride and peer pressure kept them from backing down. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez finally reached the center of the crowd. "What's going on here?" he demanded, his voice carrying the authority of years of military service. But before anyone could answer, he got a clear look at Sarah's uniform and the specific combination of ribbons and medals adorning her chest. His face went pale as he recognized decorations that were extraordinarily rare. worn by only a select few individuals in the entire military. The Silver Star, Bronze Star, with V device for valor, Purple Heart, and several ribbons that indicated special operations service in classified environments. "Oh, God," he whispered under his breath, loud enough for only Sarah to hear. "Ma'am, I apologize. These recruits don't know." Sarah held up a hand to stop him, her eyes never leaving the group of recruits who had started this confrontation. "It's all right, Staff Sergeant. These young men were just expressing their opinions about my qualifications and suggesting that my ribbons might not be legitimate." Rodriguez looked like he wanted to crawl into a hole. He recognized not just the decorations, but also the woman wearing them. Commander Sarah Mitchell was something of a legend in special operations circles, though her full service record was classified at levels that most people would never see. Martinez, still unaware of the shift in dynamics, decided to double down. "That's right. We're just saying that some people earn their place through hard work and sacrifice, while others get by on politics and publicity." The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Sarah looked at each of the recruits who had participated in the confrontation, her gray eyes steady and measuring. When she spoke again, her voice was soft, but carried clearly to everyone present. "Gentlemen, you've made several assumptions about me based on very limited information. You've questioned my integrity, suggested I'm wearing decorations I didn't earn, and repeatedly used dismissive language that indicates you don't believe a woman belongs in your military." She paused, letting her words sink in. "You're entitled to your opinions, of course, but I think it might be educational for you to learn exactly who you've been talking to and what these ribbons actually represent." Staff Sergeant Rodriguez stepped forward, his face grim. "Recruits, you need to understand that you've just—" "No," Sarah interrupted gently. "Let them finish. I'm curious to hear more about their theories regarding my background and qualifications." Thompson, sensing that the situation was spiraling beyond their control but unable to stop himself, made one final attempt to justify their behavior. "Look, we're not trying to be disrespectful, but this is supposed to be elite training. We need to know that everyone here earned their right to be here through the same standards we're being held to." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "The same standards? That's an interesting point. Tell me, what standards do you think I should be held to? What would convince you that someone has earned the right to wear these decorations and serve in this capacity?" The question was clearly a trap, but the recruits were too deep into the confrontation to recognize it. Williams stepped forward again. "Real combat experience, actual service in dangerous situations, proving yourself under fire instead of getting promoted through politics or special treatment." "Real combat experience," Sarah repeated. "Proving yourself under fire. Those are good standards." She looked around at all the faces watching her, some hostile, some curious, some beginning to look worried about what they had gotten themselves into. "Well, gentlemen, I think we've established your position clearly. You believe I don't belong here, that my decorations are unearned, and that I haven't met the standards you think are appropriate for someone in my position." She turned to Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, who was looking increasingly uncomfortable with each passing moment. "Staff Sergeant, I believe these recruits would benefit from some education about military decorations and the requirements for earning them. Perhaps we could arrange for them to learn about the specific criteria for these ribbons I'm wearing." Rodriguez swallowed hard. "Yes, ma'am. I think that would be very educational for them." Sarah smiled, and for the first time there was something genuinely warm in her expression. But there was also something else, something that suggested these recruits were about to receive an education they would never forget. Within 30 minutes, the entire recruit class had been assembled in the main briefing auditorium. Word had spread quickly through the training facility that something significant was happening, and even off-duty instructors had gathered to witness what was about to unfold. The recruits who had confronted Sarah sat in the front rows, their earlier bravado replaced by growing uneasiness. Colonel James Harrison, the base commander, had arrived personally to oversee the situation. He stood at the podium with Staff Sergeant Rodriguez and another figure the recruits didn't recognize, a weathered man in civilian clothes who carried himself with unmistakable military bearing. Sarah had changed from her dress uniform into combat fatigues, though she retained her ribbons and rank insignia. She stood quietly to one side of the stage, her hands clasped behind her back, watching the assembled recruits with the same calm expression she had maintained throughout the confrontation. Colonel Harrison stepped to the microphone. "Recruits, we've assembled you here today because of an incident that occurred earlier involving several members of your class and a visiting instructor." His voice carried the authority of decades of military service. "This incident has provided us with what we believe will be a valuable learning opportunity." Martinez shifted uncomfortably in his seat, finally beginning to grasp that this situation was far more serious than he had anticipated. The formal setting, the presence of senior officers, and the careful language being used all suggested that he and his friends had made a significant mistake. The individuals involved in today's incident made several assumptions about our visitor based on her appearance, her gender, and their own limited understanding of military service, Harrison continued. They questioned her qualifications, suggested her decorations were unearned, and used language that was both disrespectful and inappropriate. The colonel paused, letting his words sink in. They demanded to know what standards she had been held to and what experiences she had that would justify her presence at this facility. Thompson's face was growing pale as the formal nature of the proceedings became clear. This wasn't going to be a simple reprimand or extra duty assignment. This was something much more serious. "Before we proceed," Harrison said, "I want to introduce you to someone who will help provide context for what you're about to learn." He gestured to the civilian-clothed man who had been standing quietly nearby. "This is Admiral Robert Kane, retired, former commander of Naval Special Warfare Command." The mention of Naval Special Warfare sent murmurs through the assembled recruits. Most of them knew enough about military structure to understand that this organization oversaw the Navy SEALs and other elite units. Admiral Kane stepped to the microphone, his weathered face serious. "Recruits, in my 35 years of military service, I had the privilege of working with some of the finest warriors this country has ever produced, men and women who served in the most demanding and dangerous situations imaginable." He paused, his eyes scanning the crowd. "The person you question today has served under my command. I know her service record intimately because I personally signed off on many of her assignments and decorations." Williams felt his stomach drop. The formal language, the presence of an admiral, and the careful way everyone was speaking suggested that their confrontation had been with someone far more significant than they had imagined. "Commander Mitchell," Kane continued, "has served multiple deployments in Afghanistan and Iraq. She has participated in classified operations that I cannot discuss in this setting. She has led teams in situations where failure meant death for her teammates and potentially for American civilians." The auditorium was completely silent now. Even the recruits who hadn't been involved in the original confrontation were beginning to understand the magnitude of what had happened. Kane gestured toward Sarah. "The ribbons she wears tell a story that most of you cannot imagine. The Silver Star she was awarded for actions during a hostage rescue operation in which she personally eliminated multiple enemy combatants while under direct fire, allowing her team to extract American civilians from a compound in Afghanistan." Martinez felt sick. The woman they had dismissed as playing dress-up had earned one of the military's highest decorations for valor in combat. "Her Bronze Star with V device," Kane continued, "was earned during an operation in Iraq where her team was ambushed. She remained in an exposed position for over 4 hours, directing fire and coordinating evacuation of wounded team members while under continuous enemy attack. The Admiral's voice grew harder. Her purple heart represents wounds she received during that same operation. Shrapnel from an improvised explosive device that she continued to function with until her mission was complete and her people were safe. Thompson was staring at his hands, unable to meet the eyes of anyone on the stage. The woman they had mocked for her shiny ribbons had been wounded in combat while saving the lives of her teammates. "But those are just the decorations you can see," Kane said, his voice dropping slightly. "Commander Mitchell's full service record is classified, but I can tell you that she has served in units and participated in operations that exist at the highest levels of our national security apparatus." He paused again, letting the weight of his words settle over the recruits. "She has undergone training that breaks 90% of the men who attempt it. She has served in environments so dangerous that her family was told she was stationed in routine assignments to protect them from worry." Sarah remained motionless during Kane's recitation of her service, her expression neutral. She had learned long ago not to show emotion during discussions of her military record, particularly when that record was being used to make a point. Colonel Harrison returned to the microphone. "Recruits, I want you to understand what happened here today. Several of you made assumptions about a fellow service member based on prejudice and ignorance. You questioned the integrity of a decorated combat veteran without any knowledge of her background or qualifications." The colonel's voice grew stern. "In doing so, you demonstrated exactly the kind of thinking that has no place in elite military units. You showed that you judge people based on superficial characteristics rather than performance and capability." Martinez was fighting back tears of shame and embarrassment. Every word being spoken drove home how completely wrong he had been, and how badly he had embarrassed himself and his fellow recruits. "More importantly," Harrison continued, "you used language and behavior that was disrespectful to a superior officer and inappropriate by any standard of military conduct. The repeated use of dismissive terms like sweetheart demonstrates either ignorance of proper military courtesy or deliberate disrespect." Williams was trembling slightly, beginning to understand that this incident could have serious consequences for his military career before it had even really begun. Admiral Kane stepped back to the microphone. "I want to be very clear about something. Commander Mitchell could have ended this situation immediately by identifying herself and her background. She chose instead to let you reveal your own character and assumptions." He looked directly at the recruits who had been involved in the confrontation. "She gave you rope, and you hanged yourselves with it. That shows remarkable patience and professionalism on her part." Kane's expression softened slightly. "But it also presents you with an opportunity. You've learned something important about yourselves today, about your prejudices, your assumptions, and your readiness to judge others without knowledge." Sarah finally moved, stepping forward to the microphone. The auditorium fell completely silent as she adjusted the height and looked out over the assembled recruits. "Gentlemen," she began, her voice clear and steady, "I want you to understand that what happened today happens to women in the military regularly. We are questioned, dismissed, and assumed to be less capable based solely on our gender." Her gray eyes found each of the recruits who had confronted her. "The difference today is that you happen to choose someone whose record speaks for itself. But every day, you will encounter women in uniform whose qualifications you know nothing about, whose service you cannot see, whose capabilities you cannot judge from their appearance." She paused, letting her words sink in. "Some of those women will be your teammates. Some will be your leaders. Some will be in positions to determine your future in military service." Martinez finally looked up, meeting her eyes for the first time since the confrontation began. What he saw there was not anger or vindictiveness, but something that might have been disappointment. "The question you need to answer," Sarah continued, "is whether you will learn from today's experience or whether you will continue to operate based on assumptions and prejudices that have no place in professional military service." She looked around the auditorium. Elite military units, whether they're special forces, rangers, SEALs, or any other specialized organization, succeed because they focus on capability and performance. Period. Her voice grew slightly harder. They fail when they allow prejudice, ego, or ignorance to interfere with their assessment of their teammates. Men have died because someone made assumptions about what their colleagues could or couldn't do based on factors that had nothing to do with competence. Thompson forced himself to look up at her. "Ma'am," he said quietly, his voice barely audible over the microphone system. I apologize. We were wrong." Sarah nodded acknowledgement but continued speaking. "Apologies are appreciated, but they're not enough. What matters is whether you internalize what happened here and allow it to change how you think and behave going forward." She gestured to her ribbons. "These decorations don't make me better than you. They represent experiences and service, but they don't define my worth as a person or a soldier. What defines that is how I treat others, how I perform my duties, and how I contribute to my team's mission." Her expression softened slightly. "Every one of you has the potential to earn decorations like these. Every one of you has the potential to serve with distinction and honor. But that potential will only be realized if you focus on the things that actually matter: competence, character, and commitment." Admiral Kane stepped back to the microphone. "Recruits, you've been given a gift today. You've learned something about yourselves and about the military you're hoping to serve. Most people don't get such clear feedback about their assumptions and prejudices." He looked stern again. "The question is what you do with that gift. Do you dismiss it and continue operating the way you were before? Or do you use it to become better service members and better people?" Colonel Harrison returned to address the practical consequences. "The recruits involved in today's incident will report for additional training on military courtesy and equal opportunity policies. They will also submit written reports reflecting on what they learned and how they plan to apply those lessons going forward." Martinez felt a wave of relief. He had been expecting much worse consequences, possibly dismissal from the program entirely. "However," Harrison continued, his voice becoming more serious, "this incident will be noted in their training records. Any future conduct issues will be viewed in the context of today's behavior." The colonel looked around the auditorium. "For the rest of you, consider yourselves fortunate to have witnessed this lesson without having to learn it the hard way yourselves." Sarah stepped forward one final time. "Before we conclude, I want to say something to all of you, not just those involved in today's incident." She looked out over the young faces staring back at her. "Military service is difficult. Elite military service is extraordinarily demanding. You will be tested physically, mentally, and emotionally in ways you cannot imagine." Her voice became warmer. "But if you approach that service with open minds, respect for your colleagues, and focus on mission accomplishment, you have the potential to be part of something truly special." She smiled for the first time since the incident began. "Some of you may even find yourselves working alongside people who surprise you, who exceed your expectations and challenge your assumptions about what's possible." As the assembly concluded and recruits began filing out of the auditorium, Martinez approached the stage hesitantly. He stood at attention and waited until Sarah noticed him. "Ma'am," he said formally, "I want to personally apologize for my behavior today. There's no excuse for how I spoke to you or the assumptions I made." Sarah studied his face for a moment, then nodded. "Apology accepted, Recruit Martinez. But more importantly, what are you going to do differently going forward?" Martinez thought carefully before answering. "I'm going to focus on people's actions and performance instead of making judgments based on appearance or preconceptions. And I'm going to treat everyone with the respect they deserve as fellow service members." "Good," Sarah replied. "That's exactly the right lesson to take from this experience." As Martinez walked away, Sarah reflected on the day's events. Incidents like this were frustrating, but they were also opportunities, chances to educate and potentially change minds that might otherwise remain closed to different perspectives. She had faced discrimination and doubt throughout her career, but she had also seen attitudes change over time. Young service members like Martinez could learn and grow if given the chance and the right guidance. The military was changing, slowly but steadily, and experiences like today's were part of that evolution. 3 months had passed since the confrontation in the training yard, and the atmosphere at Camp Pendleton had undergone a subtle but significant transformation. The recruits who had challenged Commander Mitchell's presence were still part of the training program, but they had become different people, more thoughtful, more respectful, and more focused on performance rather than preconceptions. Sarah had remained at the facility as a permanent instructor, assigned to develop new training protocols for integrated special operations teams. Her presence had initially been met with curiosity and some residual tension, but gradually the recruits had come to see her as one of the most demanding and effective instructors they had encountered. The change was most evident in Recruit Martinez, who had gone from being the loudest critic to becoming one of Sarah's most dedicated students. He threw himself into every training exercise with an intensity that impressed even the veteran instructors, driven partly by his desire to prove that he had learned from his earlier mistakes. During a particularly challenging navigation exercise in the desert outside the base, Martinez found himself partnered with Recruit Johnson, a young woman from Colorado who had joined the program 2 months after the incident. Johnson was struggling with the physical demands of carrying a full pack across difficult terrain, and Martinez noticed her beginning to fall behind their required pace. 6 months earlier, Martinez might have been frustrated with having a female partner who was slowing down their progress. Instead, he quietly redistributed some of the equipment from her pack to his own without making a show of it, and began offering navigation tips that helped her move more efficiently through the rocky terrain. "You don't have to do that," Johnson said when she realized what he was doing. "I can carry my own weight." Martinez continued walking, adjusting his pace slightly to match hers. "I know you can, but we're a team, and teams help each other. Commander Mitchell taught us that the mission comes first, which means we all succeed together or we all fail together." His words reflected a fundamental shift in thinking that had occurred not just in Martinez, but in many of the recruits who had witnessed the events of that day in the training yard. They had begun to internalize the lesson that performance and character mattered more than any other considerations. Meanwhile, Sarah was observing the exercise from a concealed position several hundred yards away, using binoculars to monitor the recruits' progress and decision-making under stress. She had seen Martinez's quiet assistance to his partner and made a note in her evaluation report. The transformation hadn't been limited to individual recruits. The entire training program had evolved to place greater emphasis on teamwork, mutual respect, and evaluation based on merit rather than assumptions. Sarah's influence had spread through the instructor cadre as well, leading to changes in how scenarios were designed and how recruits were evaluated. Later that evening, during a mandatory study session in the barracks, Thompson was helping Williams prepare for an upcoming examination on tactical communications. Williams had continued to struggle academically despite his improved attitude, and Thompson had taken it upon himself to provide tutoring. "I still can't believe how wrong we were about Commander Mitchell," Williams said as they worked through radio protocol procedures. "I keep thinking about how stupid we must have looked." Thompson nodded, but his response reflected the maturity he had gained over the previous months. "The important thing isn't how we looked. It's that we learned something important about ourselves and changed how we think and act." He pointed to a diagram in their training manual. "Remember what she said about focusing on capability and performance? That's what we need to do now, prove that we learned the lesson and became better people because of it." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Recruit Davis, who had witnessed the original confrontation but hadn't participated in it. He had become something of an informal leader among the newer recruits, partly because of his ability to learn from others' mistakes. "Have you guys heard about the new exercise Commander Mitchell is designing?" Davis asked, settling onto his bunk with his own study materials. "Supposed to be something completely different from anything they've done before." Martinez looked up from his equipment maintenance. "What kind of exercise?" "Integration training with active duty SEAL teams," Davis explained. "Real operators coming in to work with us on a multi-day scenario. Commander Mitchell is designing it to test everything we've learned about teamwork and performance under pressure." The news sent a ripple of excitement and nervousness through the barracks. Working with actual SEAL operators represented the kind of opportunity that most recruits could only dream of, but it also meant being evaluated by some of the most elite warriors in the military. Williams felt his stomach tighten with anxiety. "Do you think we're ready for something like that? I mean, these are guys who've been doing this for years." Thompson looked at him thoughtfully. 6 months ago, I would have said we needed to prove we were as tough as they are. Now I think the real question is whether we can prove we're good teammates who focus on the mission instead of our egos." The conversation reflected how deeply the lessons from that day in the training yard had taken root. The recruits were no longer focused primarily on proving their individual toughness or superiority. Instead, they had begun to understand that elite military service was about contributing effectively to team success. 2 weeks later, the integration exercise began with the arrival of a 12-man SEAL platoon led by Lieutenant Commander Jake Sullivan. Sullivan was a veteran of multiple deployments who had worked with Sarah on several classified operations. His team included both men and women, representing the new reality of integrated special operations units. During the initial briefing, Sullivan addressed the assembled recruits with characteristic directness. "You're going to be working alongside my team for the next 5 days. We're not here to hold your hands or make you feel special. We're here to accomplish a mission, and you're either going to contribute to that mission or you're going to be a liability." He gestured toward Sarah, who was standing nearby in full combat gear. "Commander Mitchell designed this exercise based on real-world scenarios that we've encountered in operational environments. Nothing you're going to do is theoretical or academic. It's all based on actual missions that required exactly the kind of teamwork and performance you've been training for." Martinez felt a surge of pride at the mention of Sarah's role in designing the exercise. The woman they had once dismissed as playing dress-up was now creating training scenarios based on her own combat experience. The exercise began before dawn the next morning with a simulated hostage rescue scenario. The recruits were divided into teams and paired with SEAL operators, then tasked with infiltrating a mock compound, neutralizing threats, and extracting civilian role players. Martinez found himself partnered with Petty Officer First Class Maria Santos, a combat veteran who had served multiple deployments in Iraq and Afghanistan. Santos was quiet and professional, evaluating Martinez's performance without comment as they moved through the preliminary phases of the exercise. During the infiltration phase, Martinez noticed that Santos moved with an economy of motion and awareness that he had never seen before. She seemed to anticipate problems before they developed and position herself to deal with threats that hadn't yet materialized. "How do you know where to look?" Martinez whispered during a pause in their movement. Santos glanced at him briefly. "Experience, but more importantly, training yourself to think like the enemy and like your teammates at the same time. You have to see the whole picture, not just your piece of it." Her answer reminded Martinez of lessons Sarah had taught about situational awareness and team thinking. The SEAL operator was reinforcing concepts that had been introduced months earlier, but were now being applied in realistic scenarios. As the exercise progressed, the recruits began to understand why the training they had received was so important. Success in the complex scenarios required exactly the kind of teamwork, communication, and mutual respect that Sarah had emphasized since her arrival. Thompson, working with a different SEAL team member, found himself in a situation where he had to coordinate the actions of 3 other recruits while under simulated enemy fire. 6 months earlier, he might have tried to dominate the situation through volume and aggression. Instead, he found himself listening carefully to input from his teammates and making decisions based on their collective assessment of the situation. Williams, despite his ongoing academic struggles, proved to be exceptionally good at the tactical communication requirements of the exercise. His careful attention to radio protocol and clear, concise transmissions earned praise from his SEAL partner and contributed significantly to his team's success. During one particularly challenging scenario, Johnson found herself in a leadership position when the designated team leader was killed by simulated enemy fire. As the only remaining officer in the group, she had to take command of a mixed team of recruits and SEAL operators. The SEAL team members watched carefully to see how she would handle the pressure of leading more experienced warriors. Johnson took a breath, assessed the situation, and began issuing clear, decisive orders based on the tactical situation rather than trying to prove her authority. Santos, take Martinez and flank left. Williams, you're with me on communications. We're going to suppress the enemy position while the flanking team moves into position. Her orders were tactically sound and clearly communicated, and the SEAL operators responded with the same professionalism they would show to any competent leader. The scenario concluded successfully, with Johnson receiving positive feedback from Lieutenant Commander Sullivan during the after-action review. "Good leadership," Sullivan told her privately. "You focused on the mission and used your people according to their capabilities. That's what we look for in officers." The praise meant everything to Johnson, but it also reflected the broader success of the training program Sarah had helped develop. The recruits were learning to see past superficial differences and focus on contribution to team success. On the final day of the exercise, Sarah gathered all the participants for a comprehensive after-action review. SEAL operators and recruits sat together as she reviewed the lessons learned and areas for improvement. "Over the past 5 days," she began, "you've had the opportunity to apply everything you've learned in realistic scenarios alongside some of the most experienced operators in our military." She looked around the assembled group, her eyes settling briefly on each of the recruits who had confronted her months earlier. "What I've seen is a group of young warriors who understand that success comes from teamwork, professionalism, and focus on mission accomplishment, rather than personal ego or prejudice." Martinez felt a surge of pride but also humility. The journey from that embarrassing confrontation to this moment had been difficult, but it had made him a better person and a better potential warrior. "The SEAL operators you've worked with have given me their assessments," Sarah continued, "and they've indicated that several of you have demonstrated the potential for advanced training and specialized assignments." She paused, consulting notes in her hand. "But more importantly, they've noted that you've learned to work effectively as integrated teams, supporting each other regardless of individual differences or backgrounds." Lieutenant Commander Sullivan stepped forward to address the group. "In my 15 years of military service, I've seen a lot of training programs and worked with a lot of different people. What I've observed here represents exactly the kind of evolution our military needs." He gestured toward the mixed group of recruits and operators. "The threats we face today require teams that can leverage every available capability and talent, regardless of where those capabilities come from. You've proven that you can do that." As the formal review concluded, Martinez approached Sarah one final time. He stood at attention and waited for her to acknowledge him. "Ma'am, I wanted to thank you for the opportunity to be part of this exercise and for the lessons you've taught us over the past few months." Sarah smiled, the same genuine warmth that had appeared briefly during their first confrontation. "You've earned this opportunity through your own hard work and growth, Martinez. The person who called me sweetheart 3 months ago couldn't have succeeded in this exercise." Martinez nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. "Yes, ma'am. I'm not that person anymore, and I'm grateful for the chance to become someone better." As the recruits prepared to return to their regular training schedule, many of them reflected on how completely their perspectives had changed. They had learned that strength came not from dominating others or proving superiority, but from contributing effectively to something larger than themselves. The woman they had once dismissed as unqualified had become their most influential instructor, not through intimidation or authority, but through competence, professionalism, and the patient teaching of lessons they desperately needed to learn. 6 months later, when Martinez graduated from the training program and received his first assignment to an elite unit, he carried with him not just the technical skills he had acquired, but a fundamental understanding of respect, teamwork, and the importance of judging people by their actions rather than their appearance. The lesson that began with "Go home, sweetheart," had evolved into a transformation that would influence how he served and led for the remainder of his military career. And in bases and training facilities around the world, other young warriors were learning similar lessons from instructors who understood that true strength comes from inclusion, respect, and focus on mission accomplishment above all else.